I've been avoiding hotel horror stories for months because honestly, they hit too close to home. We've all stayed in hotels. We've all felt that weird energy in certain rooms. But these 3 submissions were so disturbing that I couldn't keep them to myself any longer. There's something about hotel rooms that amplifies the unknown. Thousands of people have slept in that same bed, showered in that same bathroom, stared at those same walls during their darkest hours. Sometimes it feels like all those experiences leave an imprint, creating layers of energy that the living can sense but never fully understand. Tonight's 3 stories will change how you think about hotel stays forever. This story comes from Rachel, a 31-year-old marketing executive who travels frequently for work. She thought she'd experienced every type of hotel inconvenience until her stay at a business hotel in Chicago last fall. I was supposed to stay 3 nights for a client conference. The hotel was nice enough, a mid-range business place downtown, nothing fancy, but clean and professional. I'd stayed at similar places dozens of times before. When I checked in Tuesday evening, the desk clerk seemed nervous. She kept typing and retyping something on her computer, and I could see beads of sweat on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said quickly. "Just checking room availability. We have you in 412. She handed me the key card, but I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Enjoy your stay," she said, but her voice sounded forced. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt longer than it should have. When I got to room 412, I noticed something odd immediately. The door had fresh scratches around the lock, like someone had been trying to get in with the wrong key repeatedly. Inside, the room looked normal. King bed, desk, bathroom, all the standard amenities, but something felt off. The air was too cold, even though the thermostat showed 72 degrees. And there was a smell I couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, just different. Like someone had been burning candles, but there were no candles in the room. I unpacked and went to bed around 11 p.m., exhausted from traveling. That's when it started. Around 2 I woke up to the sound of the keycard reader beeping. You know that sound, beep, 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 when someone tries to use a card, but it doesn't work. Someone was trying to get into my room. I lay still, listening. The beeping continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. I waited, heart pounding, but heard nothing else. The next morning, I mentioned it to the front desk. The clerk, a different one from the night before, looked confused. "That's strange," he said. "Room 412 has been having some technical issues lately. We'll send maintenance up to check the lock." But when I returned that evening, nothing had been done. And at exactly 2:03 a.m., I checked the clock this time. The beeping started again. This time, I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the beeping continued. It was definitely coming from my door, but there was no one there. I called the front desk. "Someone's trying to break into my room," I whispered into the phone. "We'll send security right up," the night manager assured me. But by the time security arrived 5 minutes later, the beeping had stopped. The guard checked the hallway, the stairwells, even reviewed the security footage. Nothing. No one had been on the 4th floor, except him coming to check on me. "Must be a malfunction in the lock system," he said. But I could tell he didn't believe his own words. The 3rd night, I was determined to solve the mystery. I set up my phone to record the door and stayed awake until 2 a.m. At 2:03 a.m. exactly, the beeping started again. I grabbed my phone and crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty, but through the peephole's fisheye lens, I could see something that made my blood freeze. The key card reader was lighting up red repeatedly, as if someone was standing right there, trying card after card, but there was no one visible. I watched my phone recording, And here's the part that still gives me nightmares. The audio picked up something my ears hadn't caught in real time. Between the beeps, there was a voice. A woman's voice, frustrated and confused, saying over and over, "Why won't it work? This is my room. This is my room." But there was absolutely no one in the hallway. The next morning, I demanded to speak to the manager. I showed him the recording, and his face went pale. "I think you should know," he said quietly. "That room 412 was the site of an incident 6 months ago. A guest named Margaret Stevens was found dead in that room. Natural causes, the coroner said, but ... He paused, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" "She'd been dead for 3 days before housekeeping found her. She'd missed her checkout time, but the system showed her keycard was still being used. Multiple attempts every night around 2 a.m., like she was trying to get back into her room." I felt sick to my stomach. "You mean ... We don't know what it means," he said quickly. "But several guests have reported similar experiences. The beeping, the cold air, that strange smell ... What smell?" I asked, though I already knew. "Vanilla candles. Margaret always requested vanilla candles in her room. She traveled here monthly for business, stayed in 412 specifically. Said it felt like home." That's when the twist hit me, like a punch to the gut. I pulled out my business card holder and looked at my client contact information. The company I was visiting, Stevens Marketing Solutions. Margaret Stevens had been the CEO. I was here to meet with her replacement, to discuss taking over the accounts she'd been managing when she died. The woman trying to get into her room wasn't just any guest. She was the reason I was there in the first place. I checked out immediately and never returned to that hotel. But sometimes, when I'm staying in unfamiliar places for business, I wonder about the guests who came before me, what they left behind, what they're still trying to reclaim. The strange thing is, my meeting the next day went better than expected. Margaret's replacement mentioned that they'd found detailed notes in Margaret's files about my company, with specific recommendations for collaboration that made the deal almost effortless. It was like she'd been working on it right up until the end. Like maybe, in some way, she'd been trying to finish her business all along. This story comes from James, a 28-year-old photographer who is traveling cross-country for a wedding shoot. He learned that some hotel features are designed for convenience, but sometimes convenience comes with unexpected complications. I was driving from Portland to Denver for a destination wedding, and I'd planned to stop halfway for the night. I found a decent hotel in a small town in Idaho, one of those places that probably sees more truckers than tourists. The room they gave me was fine, nothing special, but it had something I'd never encountered before, a connecting door to the adjacent room. You know, those doors between hotel rooms that families or traveling groups use when they want easy access to each other's rooms. The door had 2 deadbolts, one on my side, one on the other side. Both were locked when I checked, which gave me some peace of mind. I spent the evening editing photos and went to bed around midnight. The walls were thin, and I could hear occasional sounds from neighboring rooms. TVs, conversations, the usual hotel noise. Nothing unusual. Around 3 MMA, woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It was rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking very softly. But it wasn't coming from the hallway door. It was coming from the connecting door. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. I lay still, listening. The tapping continued for about a minute, then stopped. I figured maybe someone in the next room was having trouble sleeping, maybe tapping on the wall, absent-mindedly. But then I heard a voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. A woman's voice, speaking through the door. "Are you awake? I think there's been a mistake." I didn't respond. Hotel policy everywhere is not to open connecting doors for strangers. and something about her voice felt off. Too calm, too polite for 3 a.m. "I think they gave us the wrong rooms," she continued. "My things are in there. Can you check?" Still, I didn't answer. There was no way someone's belongings would be in my room. I'd checked everywhere when I arrived. The tapping resumed, more insistent this time. Then the voice again, but now it sounded frustrated. "I know you can hear me. Please, I just need to get my things. It'll just take a minute." That's when I got up and approached the connecting door. I put my ear against it and listened carefully. On the other side, I could hear movement, footsteps, but they sounded strange. Too light, like someone walking on tiptoes, or not quite touching the ground. "What things?" I called out softly, testing her. "My camera equipment," she said immediately. "The black cases by the window. They have my name on them." My heart stopped. I did have black camera cases by the window. They had my name on them. How could she possibly know that? I looked through the peephole in the connecting door, but it was too dark on the other side to see anything. "What's your name?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then, Sarah Mitchell. "I'm a photographer too. We must have gotten each other's rooms by mistake. But here's the thing. I hadn't told anyone at the hotel that I was a photographer. It wasn't on my registration, wasn't mentioned when I checked in. How did she know?" I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. "Hi, this is James in room ... I checked my key card. Room 237. "Can you tell me who's registered in room 236? The night clerk put me on hold for a moment. When he came back, his voice was puzzled. "Sir, room 236 is vacant tonight. We have you listed as the only guest on that side of the building." The tapping stopped abruptly, like whoever was on the other side had heard the phone conversation. "But someone's in there," I whispered into the phone. "They've been talking to me through the connecting door." "That's not possible, sir. That room hasn't been occupied in over a week." I hung up and pressed my ear to the door again. Complete silence. But then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing right on the other side of the door. I spent the rest of the night in the chair by the window, keeping watch on both the connecting door and the hallway door. No more sounds came from the next room. In the morning, I asked the front desk to show me the registration records. Room 236 was indeed empty. But when I asked about Sarah Mitchell, the clerk's expression changed. "How do you know that name?" he asked. My stomach dropped. Someone in the next room said that was their name. The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Sarah Mitchell was a guest here about a month ago. She was a photographer, traveling through for a wedding. But she ... There was an accident." "What kind of accident?" "She died in her sleep. Room 236. They found her camera equipment set up by the window, like she'd been working late into the night. The official cause was a heart attack, but she was only 29. No history of heart problems." The twist came when he showed me the guest registry. Sarah Mitchell had checked into room 236 exactly 1 month ago. But according to the records, she'd requested room 237, my room, and had been disappointed when it wasn't available. She'd specifically mentioned that room 237 had better natural light by the window for photography work. I realized that Sarah hadn't been trying to get into room 236 because it was hers. She'd been trying to get into room 237 because it was the room she'd originally wanted. The room where she'd planned to set up her camera equipment by the window. The same window where my equipment now sat. When I packed up to leave, I noticed something I'd missed the night before. There was a small piece of masking tape stuck to the windowsill, the kind photographers used to mark table positions or equipment placement. It had SM written on it in faded pencil. Sarah Mitchell had been there after all, or at least some part of her had never left. I donated one of my backup cameras to a local photography club in Sarah's name before I left town. It felt like the right thing to do, completing the work she'd come there to finish. Strangely enough, the wedding photos from that trip turned out to be some of the best work I'd ever done. Almost like I'd had some professional guidance from someone who understood what made a perfect shot. Our final story comes from Kevin, who worked as a night manager at a historic downtown hotel. Sometimes the most terrifying experiences come from the people who are supposed to know all the hotel's secrets. I'd been working as night manager at the Grandview Hotel for about 6 months when this happened. The Grandview is one of those old downtown hotels that's seen better days, but still maintains some of its original charm. Built in 1923, it's hosted everyone from traveling salesmen to minor celebrities over the decades. Part of my job was doing security rounds every 2 hours, checking the floors, making sure all the fire exits were clear, that sort of thing. I knew every creak, every shadow, every normal sound that old building made. That's why I immediately knew something was wrong on the night of October 15th. It was around 1 a.m., and I was doing my first round of the night. We only had about 30% occupancy, pretty typical for a Tuesday in October. Most of our guests were business travelers, early sleepers who didn't cause problems. I started on the 6th floor and worked my way down. Everything was normal until I got to the 3rd floor. That's where I heard the music. It was faint, classical music coming from somewhere down the hall. Violin and piano, something elegant and old-fashioned. But here's the thing. None of the occupied rooms on that floor should have had music playing. I knew every guest personally, had checked them in myself, and they were all single business travelers who'd gone to bed hours earlier. I followed the sound down the hallway and realized it was coming from room 312. According to my master sheet, room 312 was vacant. Had been for 3 days. I used my master key and opened the door. The room was empty, but it was ... different. The furniture had been rearranged. The bed was made with different linens, white instead of the beige we'd been using all week. There were fresh flowers on the knitstand, roses that definitely hadn't been there during my afternoon inspection. And the music was coming from an old radio that wasn't ours, sitting on the dresser where our flat-screen TV should have been. I turned off the radio, and the room fell silent. But as I looked around, I noticed more changes. The carpet was different, a deep red pattern instead of our standard blue. The wallpaper was different too, more ornate, more ... vintage. It was like someone had redecorated the entire room to look like it did decades ago. I called down to the front desk to double-check the occupancy records. "Hey, Maria, can you confirm room 312 is vacant?" "Hold on," she said. I could hear her typing. "That's weird. The system is showing conflicting information. It says vacant, but there's also a reservation showing someone checked in tonight. Who's the reservation under?" More typing. "Eleanor Grandview. But that's impossible. That name is flagged in our system. Eleanor Grandview." I knew that name from the hotel's history. She was the daughter of the original owner, had lived in the hotel during the 1940s and 50s. She died in 1962, and according to local legend, had requested to be buried with a key to room 312, her favorite room in the hotel. "Maria," I said slowly, "can you check what date that reservation was made?" "October 15th, 1962. The same date 60 years ago. The same date as tonight." That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. I turned around and saw a woman in a 1940s-style dress walking toward me. She was elderly, maybe in her 70s, with perfectly styled gray hair and pearls around her neck. "Excuse me," she said politely, "but I believe you're in my room." I stood there, frozen. She looked completely solid, completely real. But I knew it was impossible. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, "but this room is supposed to be vacant." She smiled, and it was a kind smile, not threatening at all. "Oh, there must be some confusion. I have a standing reservation. Same room, same date every year. Daddy always said I could stay here whenever I wanted." She walked past me into the room, moving with the careful grace of someone who knows exactly where everything should be. "Would you mind terribly closing the door?" she asked. "I'm quite tired from traveling." Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of being terrified, I found myself feeling protective. This woman, ghost or not, was polite, elegant, and clearly belonged here more than anyone else. "Of course," I said, and I started to leave. "Oh, and young man," she called softly, "could you have someone bring up some tea? Earl Grey, if you have it. And perhaps some of those little sandwiches? I haven't eaten since 1962. There was something so matter-of-fact about the way she said it that I just nodded. I went back to the front desk and told Maria what had happened. Instead of thinking I was crazy, she just sighed. "Eleanor's annual visit," she said. "I wondered when that would happen. My grandmother used to work here." She told me stories about Eleanor, how she'd appear every year on the anniversary of her death, always requesting the same things. "So what do we do?" "We let her have her night," Maria said simply. "She'll be gone by morning, and room 312 will be back to normal. It's happened before. I prepared a tea service. We didn't have Earl Grey, but we had English breakfast, and I found some finger sandwiches left over from an afternoon event. When I knocked on the door of 312, Eleanor answered immediately. "How thoughtful," she said, accepting the tray. "You run a much more considerate establishment than some of the places I've stayed." "Eleanor," I said carefully, "do you know what year it is?" She paused, teacup halfway to her lips. For a moment, her confident demeanor flickered. Sometimes I lose track," she admitted. "Time moves differently when you're not really living it. But I do know I've been waiting a very long time to come home." "This is your home," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like a young woman instead of an elderly one. "Thank you for understanding. Most people would have called the police or priests or someone to make me go away." We talked for about an hour. She told me stories about the hotel in its heyday, about the famous guests who'd stayed there, about her father's vision for making it a place where travelers felt truly welcomed. As the night wore on, she began to look tired, more translucent. "I think it's time for me to rest now," she said. "But I want you to know, you're doing good work here. Daddy would be proud of how you care for his guests." When I returned at 6 a.m. for the final check, room 312 was back to normal. Beige linens, blue carpet, flat-screen TV. The tea service was gone, but there was a single white rose on the nightstand with a note. "Thank you for the hospitality. E.G." I kept that note, and I kept Eleanor's story to myself until now, because I learned that night that sometimes the supernatural isn't about fear or horror. Sometimes it's just about kindness and making sure everyone feels welcome, whether they're among the living or not. The Grandview Hotel still operates today, and every October 15th, I make sure room 312 stays vacant, just in case Eleanor wants to come home again. And you know what? The hotel's been doing better ever since that night. Our guest satisfaction scores have gone up, our repeat customers have increased, and people always comment on how welcome they feel when they stay with us. Maybe having a guardian spirit who truly cares about hospitality isn't such a bad thing after all. These 3 stories remind us that hotels are more than just temporary shelters. They're repositories of human experiences, holding the imprints of everyone who's passed through their doors. Sometimes those imprints are darker, unfinished business, unresolved conflicts, or tragic endings. But sometimes, as Kevin's story shows us, they can also be sources of protection, guidance, and unexpected kindness. The next time you check into a hotel room, take a moment to think about who might have been there before you. Most of the time, you'll never know. But occasionally, if you're paying attention, you might discover that you're not quite as alone as you thought. And maybe, just maybe, that's not always a bad thing. Thanks for listening, and sweet dreams, wherever you're sleeping tonight.